Now I ask you a question. What would you do if your population is facing repeated rocket attacks for 8 years and your enemy is embedding his military capability in his own civilian area? You have basically 3 choices. The first choice you could decide upon is something I would utterly reject. It's a policy similar to perhaps what Russia did in Chechnya, indiscriminate attacks, regardless of the presence of civilians. That is not a policy Israel would ever pursue. There's a second choice, giving up, saying, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do in this kind of instance. There's no way of defending your civilians in a war on terrorism, so what will I do? I'll give Hamas basically a warrant to kill my own civilians. But there's a third choice, and that was the choice that Israel pursued. And it was a deliberate strategy to try and separate the Palestinian civilians from the military capability that Hamas intentionally embedded in the civilian areas. And this was done by multiple means. First of all, the Palestinian areas where Israel had to conduct military operations, when, let's say, a house, according to the Israeli military, was known to contain Grad rockets and other explosives, Israel sent multiple warnings and a whole multiple layers of warnings to the civilian population. First, of course, Israel entered into the radio transmissions of Hamas so that people listening to the radio could hear the warnings they received. Secondly, leaflets were dropped over whole areas of the Gaza Strip, which were potential target areas. And if that didn't work, there was an attempt to directly contact Palestinian families, either through their cell phone or through their home phones. For example, one such message is here, which is translated for those who do not understand the Arabic.
بلاغ عسكري. جيش الدفاع الإسرائيلي سيضرب ويدمر كل مبنى وموقع يوجد فيه ذخيرة وعتاد عسكري. ابتداء من نشر هذا البيان، كل من توجد ذخيرة وعتاد عسكري في بيته فهو معرضا للخطر وعليه مغادرة المكان حفاظا لحياته وحياة أسرته. قيادة جيش الدفاع الإسرائيلي.
Now, how do you know that they actually received those warnings? So what we have following this is a clip from Hamas television, which actually shows, A, that they knew the warnings were coming, and B, the Hamas effort to compensate for that, to keep the civilian population and the military capability of Hamas together. This, again, is taken from Hamas television at approximately the same time.
وإذا به يسأل أنت أبو بلال الجعبي؟ قلت نعم. فقال أنا الأمن الإسرائيلي معك 5 دقائق دخلي أنت أولادك. فقلت الجوال على الفور واتصلت ببعض الأصدقاء فانهار على أهالي عبر مكبرات الصوت وملأوا سطح المنزل وظلوا حتى الآن يعني مرابطون على سطح المنزل إلى أن يشاء الله سبحانه.
This policy of using human shields to protect the Hamas military capability is something which the report, by the way, examined, but it couldn't reach any conclusions about Palestinian intent because it actually asked for a standard that's almost impossible to prove. It wanted to show that the Palestinians were forced to be human shields. So we'd have to produce some kind of evidence of actually somebody forcing them at gunpoint. The fact that the Hamas regime encouraged its people to be human shields seems to be something which the report did not think was adequate evidence of the human shield's position.
من موته ومن بحثه على الموت ولذلك أصبح الموت عند شعب الفلسطيني صناعة تجيده النساء تجيده كل من في هذه الأرض يجيده الشيوخ يجيده المجاهدون ويجيده الأطفال لذلك شكلوا دروعا بشرية من النساء والأطفال والشيوخ والمجاهدين ليتحدوا بذلك آلة القصف الصهيونية وكأنهم يقولون للعدو الصهيوني إننا نحرص على الموت كما تحرصون على الحياة.
Now, this man's name is Fatih Hamad. He was a member of the Hamas parliament at the time that he made this statement in 2008. Today, he is the interior minister of the Hamas regime, and he has said explicitly in a statement in the Gaza Strip that he coordinates with the resistance movements, with the mujahideen who fight the state of Israel. There is no separation of the Hamas regime from the armed elements that have been fighting us prior to the war, during the war, and after the war as well. There's another film here, but because of lack of time, I will not go into. But it's another example of how Israel repeatedly tries to protect civilians. If, for example, a missile or weapon system is launched against a particular target, and then the Israeli military reveals that civilians have entered the area, Israel repeatedly veered the rocket or the weapon away from the target area into an empty field so as to protect civilians. Now, my question to you is this. A country that goes through all of these efforts to try and protect Palestinian civilians, to try and separate the Palestinian civilian population from the military capability that Hamas embedded in that area, is that a country that engages in deliberate attacks against the civilian population? How can the huge effort made by the State of Israel in this regard, the devotion of manpower and resources to make this happen, how can this be seen as consistent with the charge, the principal charge of the Gaza Report, the UN Gaza Report, that Israel deliberately attacked Palestinian civilians?